Let's now talk about research and solutions. Now that you've identified potential risks that could occur due to an algorithm or the socio-technical system that the algorithm is embedded in, you now have to figure out a way to mitigate those risks. And this is a difficult task, especially now that there are very few best practices available and very few historical examples or industry experience in doing this. So how do you start? Well, the first thing you do is to gather what best practices there are. And this may not be best practices in AI governance. It could be best practices in other fields like risk management and software development. But there's a lot of information out there. There are a lot of white papers, standards organizations who have working groups working on these issues. You need to gather that information. And of course, you also have to gather information from industry practitioners, people who have done it before. Once you've gathered that information, the next step is to filter through this. You have to find potential solutions which are effective for your particular problem or the problem of your client. And not everything is going to be applicable. And things that might have worked in the past may not be effective now in your client's company. So you have to filter through these in some way. And then even once you found a potential solution, maybe it's a governance framework, maybe it's a testing regime, you have to always, in my experience, tailor these solutions and then test these solutions to make sure that they are going to be effective for your client. And these three steps are the basic steps, and a lot goes into each one. But this is the general strategy. And luckily, this should look familiar to most of you because this is problem solving 101. This is not something that is unique to AI governance or AI ethics consulting. It's something that is very general for research and solving a problem. It's just that you have to practice it in the context that you're going to be using it, and in AI ethics and governance. In particular, you have to really focus on the kinds of problems that you're going to face there. So what are the requisite skills for doing this? You have to find effective techniques for reading, sorting, and referencing source material. So those academics out there are probably smiling because this is something that you do a lot of. If you're an academic researcher or even a student, reading and sorting through reference material is something that you do a lot. However, you have to do this in the context of AI governance and AI ethics materials. You have to have the ability to evaluate the strength of evidence based on the quality of the primary source or research methods. This is a little more difficult. You have to be able to read source material and really figure out whether the evidence is to be trusted. And sometimes either the source itself is potentially biased or suspect in some way, or maybe the research methods, while they could be very rigorous in a particular area, they may not be applicable to your scenario or your situation. And so you have to be able to discern what kind of research is going to actually apply to your particular problem. And anybody who's done any sort of graduate research will know that this is something that takes time to learn. And if you switch fields, it's going to take time to learn it in a new field as well. You also have to be fairly proficient in separating evidence from inferences or opinions that may be based on evidence. So there are a lot of sources where people take, let's say, a primary research study or a survey or some sort of experiment, and they take that source material and they form an opinion or they make some sort of inference based on that original research. You have to be able to recognize that those inferences are not necessarily evidence in the context in which you're trying to solve a problem. And so you have to identify when inferences or opinions are being made, and you have to figure out whether those inferences are actually applicable in your scenario. And this, again, is something that takes a lot of practice, and practice in the context of AI governance and AI ethics consulting. And then you have to be able to construct hypotheses. So after reading all of the potential solutions to your problem, you have to come up with some sort of hypothesis as to, this is why you think a particular thing is happening, why you think, for instance, bias is entering a data set, or why you think in a particular company some governance structure is not catching a particular problem where they should be noticing it. You come up with a hypothesis for why that's happening. And oftentimes the hypothesis is being supported from a lot of disparate sources of evidence, right? And so you have to sort of piece that together. And then you need to be able to test that and to know when you need to get input from experts and other stakeholders in order to test a potential solution. So, the final step really is road testing these solutions and making sure that your particular hypothesis for what is going to be an effective solution is actually going to work. And you have to know how to test that. And that's something, again, that takes practice. And I really want to emphasize that being good at these in one field. So you may have a background, you could have a PhD in some other topic. I have a PhD in astrophysics. But being good at research and in astrophysics doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to be good at emerging tech or AI ethics. Okay, it's something that I had to work at. I had to be able to take those skills that I learned in astrophysics and transfer it into this new field. And that took a lot of really deliberate practice. And you're likely going to be working at a company like BABL AI or some other consulting company. You're going to work as a team. And typically, members of that team are going to be able to mentor you through this process because you'll all be working together. Everybody's going to be putting hypotheses out there, and other people are going to challenge those ideas, and the best ones will rise to the top. But you don't really need to wait for paying clients or getting a job somewhere to gain this experience. And when I first started, I would practice through case studies. And so we came up with a methodology, which we eventually published. But in order to test that methodology, we would take case studies. We'd take algorithms that were in the world. We'd take real and contrived scenarios. And we would say, can we identify risk in these particular scenarios? And then further, can we identify solutions that are actually going to work? And would they have worked in some historical example, like the Facebook example? Could we have caught that ahead of time? And if we had caught it, could we have the methodology for testing, let's say, that we came up with, would it have actually been effective at catching it? And this takes a lot of work. You have to be willing to do that hard research, go through case studies, go through hypothetical examples, bounce ideas off of people in order to gain that experience. You don't have to wait for clients in order to do it. In fact, gaining those skills now is more likely going to get you clients in the future because you'll actually would have road tested some of your ideas. So next, we're going to talk about how do we effectively communicate these solutions, or effectively communicate in general with clients, with each other, with the public.